Hello and welcome to this very special broadcast by NDTV World. It's 7th of October, marks 1 year since the horrific Hamas attacks that took place in Israel. Since then, it's unleashed a larger chain reaction across the entire Middle East. And as things stand right now, there's a real escalation possibility that exists between Israel and Iran. I am Gaurie Dwivedi, and over the course of the next 60 minutes, I'm going to take you through what all could possibly happen in Middle East. How does India stand to get impacted? What is exactly United States' role in this? And most importantly, the man of the moment, Benjamin Netanyahu. What is his political future all about? And how much does it rest on Israel's next military moves? But before we go any further, take a look at this report that tells you the story so far.
As sirens rang across Israel at 6:29 a.m., with Israelis marking the one-year anniversary of the Israel-Hamas war, the militant group launched fresh strikes at Tel Aviv as memorials mourned the victims of the deadliest attack in the country's history. Meanwhile, families of hostages still held in Gaza held a silent protest in front of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home. It was exactly a year ago that Hamas launched an unprecedented cross-border attack on Israel on various kibbutz and the Nova Music Festival, killing 1,200 Israelis and taking 250 hostages. Israel's subsequent retaliation triggered a year of devastation and turmoil across the region and the world. A week after Hamas's onslaught left Israel's defense in shambles, Israeli forces began bombing Gaza and limited ground operations into the region. Followed by a full-scale invasion into the region on 27th October, over two-thirds of Gaza has been destroyed since the war, including schools, hospitals, and more. The WHO reports that only 12 of the 36 hospitals in Gaza remain partially functional, leaving over 2 million Palestinians without access to proper health care. After a month of fighting, Israel and Hamas agreed to a Qatar and Egypt-brokered temporary ceasefire on 24th November, the only ceasefire in the year-long war. During this 6-day truce, 105 hostages and 240 Palestinian detainees were freed, while several humanitarian aid trucks entered the Strip. The conflict resumed on 1st December, with the IDF launching their first big ground assault on southern Gaza on the outskirts of Khan Yunis. Roughly 6 months into the war, the region saw its first major escalations as tensions grew between Israel and Iran after Tel Aviv struck an Iranian embassy in Syria. Iran rained down missiles on Israel, its first attack targeting Israel directly from its own soil. Israel responded to the attack by striking an Iranian airbase. Perhaps the most consequential moment in the Israel-Hamas war apart from October 7th occurs. Israel kills Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh on a targeted strike in Tehran, shifting the war into a dangerous new phase. Last month saw the conflict expanding, with Israel now striking Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, targeting their pagers and radios and rigging them with explosives. In a further blow to the group, Hezbollah chief Nasrallah is killed in a barrage of Israeli strikes on Beirut.
In the past 365 days, more than 40,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza and thousands more in Lebanon, in a war that has changed West Asia forever. Only time will tell what lies ahead for the people of West Asia. Disha Bagchi for NDTV World.
We told you about the human cost of war. There are no winners here. There are just losers. On the Israeli side, 1,200 people died on 7th of October last year, 251 taken hostages, about 100 of them still with Hamas. 50% of those, that's close to 50, expected to still be alive. 365 days later, their families are still waiting. Those questions still haunt Netanyahu's government. But more importantly, what happens next going forward? What will be the shape of this war from here on? Will there be a possible de-escalation, or will this be an all-out escalation and a larger conflict? Let's get in Trent also to talk about what this means from here on. He joins us live from Tel Aviv to give a sense of what is the situation there. Trent, thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking to NDTV. My first question to you, it's a horrific day for everyone in Israel to remember, but one that could also needs to now be decided as to what will be the future course of action for the government from here on. What are you picking up? It's been a day, a lot of commemoration as well, but talk to us, what's the next word coming in?
Well, look, a lot of emotion here today, as you might imagine. Official commemoration services began at 6:29 a.m. here, marking 1 year to the minute since Hamas launched that surprise attack on Israel, killing 1,200 people, including children and women and a number of civilians. We've obviously seen those official commemoration services taking place. We've seen the families of the hostages outside the Prime Minister's residence calling for him to do more to get their loved ones home. And I think for many here, this is a day where they are not just remembering what happened, but also, as you rightly say, reflecting on where we go from here. And right now it feels like Israel is locked in a long-term war across multiple fronts now, and public security does remain front of mind amidst real concerns that there could be more violence. I mean, just to give you one small example, I was out earlier just quickly grabbing some lunch, and I saw some young school children out with their teacher in the park doing arts and crafts, drawing for the hostages to try and come home. And they were under the presence of 3 heavily armed policemen watching them amid concerns that this day could be a draw for terrorists trying to cause yet more violence. So I think Israel knows it's at a crossroads right at this moment, remembering what happened 1 year ago and unsure about what will happen in the next 365 days.
Trent Murray, appreciate you joining us live to talk to us about what things are looking like in Tel Aviv right now. In fact, shifting focus now to the first big discussion that we are having in this special broadcast, which is about where does escalation go from here on. Iran's proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, have been now in a very deep battle with Israel for the last 1 year. But what has changed is that Iran itself has attacked directly Israel twice in the last 1 year. Once was on 14th of April, and now the last couple of days back. 200-odd missiles were struck from Iran to Israel, and there is now growing chatter. I use the word chatter because there's still no confirmation about whether any of this would move ahead, but there's growing chatter amongst various sources and amongst various quarters that maybe this could be headed towards a possible nuclear escalation. Let's discuss this in greater detail, and let me also, in fact, tell our viewers about some of the details as far as the military statistics that hold between the two, that is Iran and Israel. The only thing that Israel has in comparison to Iran in much, much better strength is, of course, its air defense systems. But let's get in Professor Andrew Latham, who's joining us. He's a professor of political science, joining us from Carnegie. Thank you so much, Professor Andrew, for speaking to me. And we also, in fact, have Sharon Haskell, who's a member of the Israeli Senate. It's, of course, she's a member of parliament from Israel. Thank you so much, both of you, for speaking to me. And let me start by asking this to you, Professor Andrew, which is that as things stand right now, there is this greater discussion around whether Israel should strike Iran's nuclear capabilities, whether this will expedite Iran's efforts to build a nuclear bomb in the first place. Do you think this launch on launch, which is what essentially the discourse is likely to be, is clearly a step away from any effort whatsoever in de-escalation?
I actually don't think de-escalation is in the cards. I think the Israeli government has decided that this is its opportunity to deal with the so-called ring of fire, the axis of resistance, and to degrade it militarily to the point where Israel is safer, not safe, but safer than it is in any other circumstances. I imagine that Israel will launch strikes against Iran's oil infrastructure, for example. 83% of Tehran's revenues come from oil exports. You knock out 2 ports, that's all it really takes. And the flow of revenue that is supporting Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and their proxies in Syria and Iran dries up. What I don't imagine happening, although I could be wrong, I do not imagine that Israel will strike at Iran's nuclear infrastructure in a meaningful way, primarily because it doesn't have the ability to do so. Secondarily, because the Americans are really opposed to it, and that doesn't always matter, but I think on this particular score it will. And they can achieve many of their aims without going after that Iranian nuclear infrastructure. Now, I'll say very, very quickly that Iran has been depending on its proxies and on its ballistic missile and cruise missile inventory to deter Israel. Both of those have been degraded to the point where it only has a nuclear option. And so my concern is that going forward, Iran might decide this is the moment, and it won't take more than 6 or 8 weeks to weaponize.
6 to 8 weeks is what Iran may be away from actually building that nuclear capability. Worrying for the world, because that could possibly mean further escalation. In fact, Sharon, let me ask you this. There are 2 questions that I want to ask. One is that do you really agree with what Professor Andrew said, that it's going to be the oil facilities that Israel would like to hit, but that could also mean escalation and further escalation, and then is Israel prepared for those consequences?
Look, it's important to note also, after the report that you have about the conflict, that we are at war with Iran since the 8th of October. Hezbollah is an army of Iran. It's been directly attacking Israel for almost a year now. Okay, and we need to make sure that Iran doesn't pose a threat to Israel. Now, Iran now with 3 facilities, nuclear reactors, is a serious threat to Israel. And we do not want to come to a point where they are actually are an existential threat to our country. Now, it's difficult to say right now what the response is, but I can tell you that it should be that we need to eliminate the danger of Iran from our citizens, from our children, from our community. Iran doesn't just pose a threat to Israel. Iran is a serious threat for our entire region, and not just. It's a threat to America. It's a threat in South and Central America. Hezbollah is operating in South and Central America as much as they're controlling the illegal drug and illegal weapon routes, okay? So understanding how dangerous Iran is, what its goals are to completely destroy the nations of democracy, the free nations. This is a cultural war. This is a religious war against radical Islam. And when you understand that that is their goal, you understand that you are left with no other choice but to eradicate that threat, not just to Israel, but to all of the society, to humanity.
Okay, let me then, Professor Andrew, before I get in some of those numbers talking about the specific military comparisons for our viewers, let me just tell them that Israel, of course, maintains and has the most sophisticated air defense systems. Most technologically advanced missile arsenals that exist in this region belong to Israel. A lot of that, of course, is because of its allies, America and US. But recently, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has taken a very strong position that even if some of its allies are not willing to give him weapons going forward, he will not back down. And Professor Andrew, then let me ask you this, that in the wake of what Sharon just said, it indicates that this is a war that's in for the long haul. 1 year into this war, are we any closer to closure than what we were 365 days back?
Well, in one sense, if you're looking at ceasefires and de-escalation, no. If you're looking at the ability of Iran and its proxies to attack Israel, yes. Israel has made significant progress. Hamas as a military force is defunct, despite the fact that it lobbed a couple of missiles into Israel today. Hezbollah is on the back foot, but well on its way to being dismantled. The Israeli air defense system is more than capable of defeating any Iranian cruise missile or even ballistic missile attacks. The only real question is, Israel enjoys escalation dominance up and down that escalation ladder. The only real question is, does Prime Minister Netanyahu believe that he has the skating room that will allow him to attack Iran's nuclear infrastructure, recognizing he can't get the most deeply buried facilities. They're just simply beyond Israel's capability. But Israelis can certainly degrade that nuclear program.
But do you think that would be further escalation? Because as things stand right now, yes, Benjamin Netanyahu has a window till about the 5th or 6th of November. That leadership vacuum is what it's allowing Israeli leadership to take more bold decisions. But do you think going for the jugular could probably require even the Iranian leadership to then respond in a much larger way than what it has done so far?
They would like to, but they have demonstrated that they really don't have the ability to strike back any more than they have thus far. Their missile attacks have come to nothing. They could up the ante in that respect, but I think Israel is more than capable of defeating that kind of an escalation. The Israelis enjoy complete air supremacy. The Iranian Air Force is vintage 1979.
Exactly.
And their air defense system as well. So anytime Iran tries to up the ante, Israel dominates that next rung militarily and geopolitically. I see that April attack when Tehran declared victory, and that was the end of it, because they knew they had no other options.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are also fault lines within this region that I'm going to come back to in just a bit. A weakened Iran makes sense for America as well. There is, of course, a weakened Iran also means that there is no leadership within the Muslim world that Iran and Turkey really jostle for that is then up for grabs. And also at the end of the day, there is a pro-West and anti-West lobby within this entire Muslim region as well. So it's not a monolith, but we're going to come back and talk about that in just a bit. Sharon, let me ask you this two questions. What Professor Andrew said is absolutely correct, that Iran's military capability is much less when it comes to Israel. But what I want to ask you is the fact that a year into pounding into Gaza and pounding both Hamas as well as Hezbollah, the fact that they've been able to strike back indicates their ability to recoup faster than what Israel estimated. Would you think so?
So the thing is that when you try and dismantle a terrorist organization, specifically also the way how Iran works, not just in Lebanon, but in Syria and Iraq, they're not setting just a proxy like a terrorist organization or a military that can actually fight physically, but they also create a political power, political parties, and influential structures in that country so that they can actually control it. For example, Hamas is not just a military. They're also holding key position in government that allows them to indoctrinate, incite, and control an entire population. From that population, they indoctrinated, they are capable of recruits, terrorists, into their army of terror. Okay? So you cannot just fight military, but you have to understand that this fight has to be from a leadership, from a point of strategic political influence as well. And that's why with Hezbollah, we made the grave mistake of not dismantling the shipment of arms that was coming into Lebanon to the point where they pose a serious threat on Israel.
Let me ask this to Professor Alex. Let me ask this to Professor Alex.
I just want to finish my point about it, that we cannot allow Iran another 5 or 10 years to actually bypass us and pose an existential threat on Israel. It's not just about, the balance of military at this point, but it is what it's going to look like in 5
It's
or 10
an existential
years.
crisis. It's an existential crisis for Israel, which probably one, would lead to ask about political solutions to a military conflict. Is that what it should be? But I want to get in Professor Alex as well, Director of Iran Program, joining us from Tehran-born Washingtonian, in fact. Professor Alex, that as things stand right now, I want to talk about what happens going forward. Both Israel and Iran, are they headed towards a deeper conflict that could possibly escalate? Are we on the verge of seeing that escalation, given the fact that ceasefire seems to be nowhere on the table right now? Professor Alex.
Thank you. It's great morning from Washington. Look, I think neither side clearly wants all-out conflict. I think the Iranian side clearly appreciates that war with Israel very, very likely means war with the United States and Israel's other Western partners, allies, those countries out there that support Israel. The Iranians can't afford it. And I think the Iranian regime really wants to stick to the game plan of before, which is a long-term protracted war, bleeding Israel over years to come and avoid conflict right now. That's the Iranian game plan, hasn't changed. If you listen to Ali Khamenei, the Iranian Supreme Leader's speech on Friday, he pretty much said that. From Israel's point of view, look, they would love to see regime change in Tehran tomorrow, but Israel can't do this on its own. That's just obvious to anyone. And the United States right now, if you look at this country, is not ready to enter a conflict on that scale in the Middle East. So those two realities basically make me wonder that even though, as you said, is true, right now suspension of hostilities is not on the cards, but that might well be the only way out of this. And you have to wait and see if the Israelis, the Iranians will come to that conclusion sooner rather than later.
Then let me ask you this, Professor Alex, which is that is this going to expedite Tehran's efforts to build that nuclear weapon and its arsenal that it's been working towards? I know building a nuclear capability is not just about turning a couple of screws, it's much more than that. But will this expedite that process?
It might. Look, the Iranian nuclear program is about a quarter century old at least. And no country in the history of man has taken this long to produce a nuclear weapon. I mean, this is Second World War technology. You don't need that much time. So it's a political decision in Tehran. It's a political decision if they want to have a nuclear weapon or not. I think as of today, their calculation is that it will cost Iran more in terms of strategic interests. For example, it could create an arms race in the region. Countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, UAE, others might want to weaponize. That's not necessarily a good thing from Iran's perspective. And on top of that, you got to worry about America's reaction. The United States has set that's the red line.
Absolutely. Sharon, I want to give you the quick closing comment. It is 7th of October. It is still a very harsh truth that Israel is commemorating this day, even though 50 of those hostages are yet to be freed. Last word for you on the show before we take a break.
And so we still are longing to bring back more than 100 hostages that are being held by Hamas in the dungeons of torture. This is our main goal. We didn't want this war, but the 7th of October was a declaration of war, not just by Hamas, but by Iran. What you've seen, these are war, and still are the first days or the first, scene of the war with Iran. We are fighting against radical Islam, the hatred towards our culture, our values, freedom, minorities' rights, women's rights, freedom of press, freedom of religion. This is what they are actually fighting against. The war against radical Islam is spreading all around the world. And I know that India has been struggling with that a lot as well. And
absolutely. Radical Islam, actually radicalization is something that Israel is dealing with and needs to address. And then, of course, there are larger issues. Sharon, thank you so much for speaking to me. Professor Alex, if you could stay, and Professor Andrew, if you could stay for a quick comment after this very short break. We come back to talk more about, well, what happens in terms of United States in the present game. Is it losing its leadership? Is it creating a vacuum? And is it allowing Benjamin Netanyahu to take gambles that probably his government wouldn't have taken otherwise? We come back and talk more. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching NDTV World. I'm Gaurie Dwivedi, and over the next 30 minutes, we are going to talk about what happens next as far as the war in the Middle East is concerned. 365 days since the Hamas attacks on Israel, and now the war has in fact expanded to Lebanon. Israel is trying to dismantle the entire Hezbollah infrastructure. Remember, there have been about 10,000 rockets that have been hit from Hezbollah into Israeli territory in the last 1 year. And now Benjamin Netanyahu government wants to ensure that that infrastructure is also dismantled. What's happening on ground? My colleague Mohammad Ghazali joins me live from Beirut to talk to us about how things are looking right now. Mohammad, thank you so much for speaking to me. First of all, tell us where exactly are you standing in Lebanon, and also tell us how things are looking right now on ground, because yesterday, on the eve of the 7th of October anniversary, there were fresh attacks that took place. Israel took out some of the weapons depot, is what we know, of Hezbollah.
Okay, so Gaurie, right now I'm here just beside the Mediterranean Sea. You can see clear and calm sky and clear and calm ocean here, but the situation in Lebanon is not as calm as it appears. The situation is tense. Just last night there were attacks on the southern suburbs of Beirut, and there were many villages, residential areas which were damaged there, and people have been left homeless. What is happening in Beirut right now? So we'll start from the southern area of Beirut, which shares its border with the occupied territory of Palestine. So there, the occupied territory of Palestine and its forces are engaged in ground combat with the Hezbollah fighters, and that is why more troops have moved into the southern Lebanon area, where Hezbollah fighters are engaged with the IDF forces in a ground combat. And there have been reports of Israeli soldiers, 2 Israeli soldiers getting killed, but the Hezbollah aligned media or the Lebanese media claims that there are far more casualties which have been reported on the other side. Back in Beirut, in the city center, in the heart of the city, there is no such impact of the war, because there are a couple of locations where Israel had carried out aerial strikes. On the north and on the south of the country, these 2 locations are under intense aerial bombardment from the occupied territory of Palestinian forces. On the south, we know that's a Shiite stronghold, so that also happens to have members of Hezbollah. And that is where the intense bombardment is going on. Close to the heart of the city, and I can just show you, we are standing close to the Beirut airport. So the flights are still moving in and moving out of Beirut airport, but Israel is also carrying out aerial strikes close to the airport area. The roads and streets leading to the airport have also been damaged. The other situation here in Beirut is that there is an area called Dahieh that is very close to the city center, hilly terrain, where around 7 lakh people stay, and most of them are from Shiite sect. So Israel had carried out intense bombardment in that area, and that is why a lot of people have left that particular region and have moved to the city center. Now the city of the Beirut has also turned into a refugee camp. All the government schools, government hospitals, there is a makeshift arrangement to accommodate these people. So there is a lot of traffic chaos in the city, because more than 3 lakh to 5 lakh to 7 lakh people are moving from one direction to another. Some people from southern suburbs of Beirut, of Lebanon, are moving to Beirut city. Some people who are close to the Syrian border, they are going back to Syria, and most of them are Syrian refugees who had left Syria and got into Lebanon during the uprising of 2011 and post 2014 emergence and impact of ISIS in Syria. So the same people who were refugees and had entered in Lebanon a decade ago are now forced to flee Lebanon because of the continued attack from the occupied territory of Palestine and its forces. Besides that, what is happening here in Lebanon, all eyes are on the neighboring country to see whether they will spring any fresh surprises by attacking in the heart of the city, because there are many areas which have damaged buildings and all in the outskirts of Beirut.
Okay.
Right now, there is also confusion about the leadership of Hezbollah, because a lot of senior commanders have been killed. And people expect, though people oppose Hezbollah, but they're also expecting that there should be one resistance force. They're not perceived as terrorists or militia here, but they're part of the society. So a lot of people are expecting that their presence is mandatory in order to avoid any kind of invasion or occupation by the occupied territory of Palestinian forces.
All right. Mohammad Ghazali, appreciate you joining us live from Beirut. Stay safe, and we're going to keep coming back to you for more updates. Well, the fact is, as far as the ground invasion by Israel is concerned into Lebanon, the IDF has said that they want it to be limited. They want it to be for a short period of time, and there is no way that they are looking at any long-term presence in Lebanon. But let's now talk about the diplomacy related to this entire region, and has it completely failed? And is there a complete breakdown in terms of any efforts to try and reach a ceasefire? Take a look at this report. We come back and talk more about where exactly is US leadership right now in the Middle Eastern mess.
Charles de Gaulle, the French military general and statesman, had once said, "Diplomats are useful only in fair weather. As soon as it rains, they drown in every job." Decades later, de Gaulle's words still resonate in the current geopolitical scenario, as world leaders continue to struggle to find common ground over a ceasefire in Gaza. U.S. efforts to secure a ceasefire has so far yielded no positive results, as Iran-backed Houthi rebels continue to attack the Red Sea shipping, and now the Israel-Hezbollah conflict threatens to escalate into an all-out regional war.
Each of us has to continue to press all of the parties to make the decisions necessary to get this deal over the finish line. It remains, again, the best way to get hostages home, bring relief to people, and also can help us reduce tensions on other fronts.
Experts suggest that the conflict highlights the limits of U.S. power and influence in the Middle East. Despite being Israel's top arms supplier and a strong ally, U.S. President Joe Biden has failed to change Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's mind. The Biden administration has been trying for a year to help broker an Israeli-Hamas ceasefire deal and free hostages taken by the militants in their October 7th attack last year. U.S.'s top diplomat Antony Blinken has traveled to the region nearly 10 times in the past year, and no breakthrough is imminent, according to reports. Many U.S. officials have blamed Hamas for failed negotiations, but some also cite Netanyahu's shifting demands. Qatar, a strong regional force, played a big role in earlier ceasefire negotiations, but has not been able to achieve the desired results. With another front opening in the Middle East and Netanyahu in no mood of declaring a ceasefire, the task of achieving a ceasefire in Gaza seems to be a distant reality and shows how diplomacy has failed the region. With Vishal Vivek, Samia Afsar for NDTV World.
All right, let's now talk about whether or not diplomacy has completely failed in the Middle East. Besides Professor Andrew, Professor Alex, who continue to be with me on this show, let's also get in Aziz Al-Ghashia, who's a senior fellow with the ORF, Salman Seema, who's a former political prisoner from Iran. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me on this very special broadcast. In fact, let me start with you, Professor Andrew, and then I'm going to come to Salman Seema as well. Professor Andrew, as the things stand right now, a weakened Iran is in America's interests, no doubt about it. But the fact that Israel did not even inform its closest ally before the latest strike indicates a complete breakdown in terms of the coordination and talks between US and Israel.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd characterize it as a complete breakdown, a selective breakdown. The Israelis are sharing with the Americans what they want.
It's a need-to-know basis.
On a need-to-know basis. They also have security concerns. They don't want things leaking, etc. The bottom line really comes down to this, that American interests and Israeli interests overlap considerably, but they're not exactly the same. And the United States, for both domestic political reasons in the context of this election, but also for geopolitical reasons, simply doesn't want this to escalate in ways that are going to alienate the so-called Arab street in places like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and UAE, undermining the Abraham Accords and all of that, which is already happening. They would prefer to see de-escalation and ceasefire in order to advance that particular agenda, whereas the Israeli government has simply decided they are going to go to whatever lengths necessary to degrade and demolish these military forces around their borders.
Absolutely. Aziz, let me bring you in before I get in Professor Alex, which is that right now, of course, US and Israel are together in this. But going forward, when that window for Benjamin Netanyahu closes, I feel it probably closes on the night of 5th of November when the president-elect is announced, because that's when there will be a sense that some of this leadership vacuum would end. Do you think then there would be a greater certainty as far as where the diplomatic channels will go as far as bringing things down and making a serious effort towards de-escalation in this region?
Well, firstly, it's good to join you, and thank you very much for having me. Of course, I have to say I'm coming from the region here from Saudi Arabia, so I'm going to give you a perspective from an outside region about this, because I think what you say is a very important question, but it's really an American question as well. But let me share my point nonetheless, because I think when it comes to these windows that you alluded to, rightly, one of the things that I can argue is that these windows and these political windows seem to be opening and closing. There was a window beforehand a few months ago about trying to have Saudi Arabia and Israel normalize relations based on a ceasefire, and it was all about sort of this is the last opportunity that Saudi Arabia and Israel normalize relations, which will lead to a ceasefire and which will lead to other things growing, as I think Professor Andrew alluded to. So I think when it comes to windows, no, and also clarity, no, I don't think so. I think Benjamin Netanyahu is someone who understands the American politics very well. And more importantly, I think he's someone who understands how to manipulate American domestic politics very well and leverage it to his advantage. Of course, we have two different kinds of windows here. There is this opportunity in the United States.
But to be fair, Aziz, there is a bipartisan support in favor of Israel. Both the presidential candidates have come out unequivocally saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, especially after those heinous attacks, and they support Israel. Not even once has there been any talk about weapons embargo, something that you're hearing in France and UK. Those are the quarters where you're hearing this, but nowhere in the American political system. But hold your thoughts there. And
but just to say this, but it's too costly to say this now before an American election, and I think that's why you won't hear it. But even afterwards, and I think what you mentioned is right, because here, Israel is a domestic issue in the United States. It's not really a foreign policy issue. So, and I think this is what this is what Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to do. So I just wanted to clarify that. I agree with your point. I agree.
Salman Seema, I'm going to come to you because I have a couple of questions for you, and I'm sure everybody else would like to hear your thoughts as well. But before that, especially on whether or not there's going to be something related to Arab Spring because of what is happening in Jordan and Egypt, I'm going to come to that. But let me take one view from Professor Alex, which is around the fact that as I said, this is a situation where many felt that probably the Biden administration could have done more. Whether you talk about hostages, whether you talk about ceasefire, whether you talk about a very serious signaling with regard to Iran's nuclear installations. Professor Alex, do you think maybe the messaging could have been different from the Biden administration?
Well, look, in short, there's been too much messaging coming from the Biden White House. When you provide a message and then you don't follow through, that hurts America's standing and hurts America's credibility. And that's exactly what's happened, because we've heard so many times over the last year, the United States got the deal in the, it's ready, there's a ceasefire, the hostage is being released, and then nothing happens. That's been a damage for the United States. And I think, frankly, going forward, if this conflict continues as it does, it is better for the United States, for this White House, to just not say anything unless they are 100% sure they can deliver. Because, look, the rest of the world is watching. America's credibility is at stake here. There are countries like Russia and China that are looking to take advantage of everything America gets wrong in this conflict. This isn't just about Israel and Iran and this regional war. Of course, that's the heart of it right now. But there are long-term ramifications. And that ought to be on the minds of the Biden folks that are, making these decisions at the moment.
Absolutely. Viewers, you want to hear Salman Seema as well. He's former political prisoner from Iran. There's been a lot of talk about how there is now a so-called reformer or a moderate president in Iran. I have different thoughts about that. I don't fully agree with that. But the fact is there is this expectation that a moderate or a reformist president in Iran could pave the way for some sort of a different political situation or a political settlement to this issue. In the backdrop of that, and the fact that he's moderate and he wants to, of course, even look at different political establishments, I want to ask you, Salman, two questions. One is that Pezeshkian, for whatever may be his political leanings, is coming at a time when the Iranian people continue to be deeply upset after the anti-hijab protests that took place in 2022. And there have been many writers, thinkers who feel that given the public outcry, it is just a matter of time before the regime, which is already facing serious questions related to legitimacy, could be very seriously challenged.
So thank you for inviting me, and I would like to use this opportunity to say my condolences to the nation of Israel, and our thought and prayers are with the hostages these days. So first of all, there is no such a moderate president, moderate hardliner. So what is the moderate? During the last months when Pezeshkian came to the power, they execute each 6 hours one Iranian. I cannot call this president who is a puppet of Ali Khamenei, the dictator in Iran, as a moderate. So this is a game, internal game by the regime. When the pressure against regime goes high, they're gonna say that, oh, we are moderate. If you do that, the hardliner gonna come. So we see that president in Islamic regime is nothing more than a puppet of the big Ayatollah. And the second thing that we should consider, as you said, the people of Iran, the willing of Iranian people, it's an option on table. And
but do you think there's a serious threat? Do you think there's a serious threat to the Iran political regime right now, as many in the Western world seem to think?
Yes, there is a serious hope for the people of Iran to make Iran great again and bring the freedom to their country and changing the regime and get rid of all the terrorism in the Middle East. One of your guests mentioned to ceasefire. We had ceasefire on October 6th, and escalation happened in 1979 when Islamic regime came to the power and started to support terrorism. Hamas, Hezbollah, all of them supported by the regime in Iran. You don't want a terrorism? Okay, get rid of the Islamic regime in Iran.
Okay, Salman, last question I want to ask you is that many feel that what is happening in Iran could also have larger ramifications in terms of Egypt and Jordan. These are poor countries. They are getting impacted with the economic crisis. They're also, of course, hosting large Palestinian origin population. And there could be some rip-off of what's happening in the region on both Egypt and Jordan. Do you feel that? There are, again, some writers who feel that these are ideal conditions for an Arab Spring 2.0.
So you call it Arab Spring in any location, in any country around the world. If people want to get rid of their dictator and bring the secular democracy, human rights, we should support that. And we know that usually democracy doesn't fight with each other. So yes, people of Iran has been inspiring before. They can be inspiring again. But you should consider that not just in last 2 years after the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini, for 45 years, we see the difference between the people in Iran and the regime that occupy Iran.
Right.
People of Iran are more brave and they are standing against the regime.
Absolutely, Salman Seema. Thank you so much for speaking to NDTV. And I can see that placard also behind you which says Iranians stand with Israel. So that, of course, you heard whether or not there is any real threat to Pezeshkian's government and the Khomeini regime. Before I get in, Daniel Rubinston, who is an Israeli, who will talk about what really happened last year. Remember, it is 7th of October, exactly 365 days after what happened in Tel Aviv and several other parts of Israel last year. Before I come to you, Daniel, I want to take a quick reaction from the other three on what Salman said in terms of a larger impact. these political considerations, we're talking about political considerations in Iran, in US. What about political considerations in Iran? How much are they set to impact what the geopolitical climate going forward could be? Aziz.
Well, I'd appreciate it if the question was posed about the Arab Spring to the Arabic guy on the panel, but I'm very happy to engage with this more. I think your concern, if
no,
I
this
could
is not
say,
about Arab Spring. I'm saying about the concerns regarding Pezeshkian and his government feeling that after the anti-hijab protests, many feel that his government continues to be unpopular, and taking very drastic military action against Israel may further increase that resentment against the Iranian regime.
You have an Iranian on the panel. Ask him. He's a very well-known Iranian on the panel, and he's actually a colleague, and I respect him very much.
Okay.
So I'm not going to speak about Iran, and I'm going to let someone else speak about Iran, because that out of respect to Iran.
All right.
So
yes.
okay. If you want me to talk
Professor
about
Alice, you want to speak? You want to take that, sir?
I'm happy to talk about the Arab Spring.
I appreciate. Thank you so much, Aziz. Thank you for your kind words. Look, a couple of things very quickly. In terms of Pezeshkian, he is a president. In the context of the Islamic Republic, the president, I wouldn't say he's just a symbolic figure. He has certain powers, but certainly not in the area of strategic issues like Iran's regional policies, Iran's relations with the United States, or certainly the matter of question of going to war with Israel. These are not decisions that the president makes. At the Supreme National Security Council level, he does oversee that kind of a decision making, but he's not the voice here to look out for. The individual you want to look out for is Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. He's been there since 1989, and he's the one who's calling the shots. But then one quick point, this idea of the Islamic Republic is bad. How many people would disagree with that? Everyone knows that the Islamic Republic is bad. That's not the issue here. The issue is how do you bring about regime change? And I can tell you, sitting here in Washington, there's no serious plan for regime change in Iran. And an Iran that blows up with nothing good to replace this regime is actually going to be worse for the entire.
Okay. Before I come to Professor Andrew, let me get in Daniel. He's been very patiently waiting and listening to all of you. But I want to ask him about, as an Israeli, as you commemorate and mark this this anniversary, painful as it is, I want to ask you about the hostage situation. Many have been saying that maybe the getting back or release of hostages is now an issue that has become almost like a corollary to the larger military action instead of being the primary objective.
Yes, it's October 7th again in Israel, and it feels like October 365th. This day has not ended for us, as you mentioned. We have more than 100 hostages still in Hamas terror dungeons in Gaza, including a baby, Kfir Bibas, his brother, Ariel Bibas, their mother, their father. We have not heard from them for a year. Getting them out of Hamas terror dungeons remains a top priority, but we are facing a multi-front war from the Iranian regime and its proxies. That's Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Iranian militias in Syria and in Iraq, and Iran itself. So everything is a priority. We are dealing with a multi-front war. This war has not ended, and it cannot end. I do not see a diplomatic off-ramp, because Hamas in Gaza is saying the only diplomatic off-ramp.
What is the end then? Is an endless war the only end?
The end is that the Hamas terror regime in Gaza is defeated. It has no longer any government or military capabilities that can threaten the people of Israel who live just a few football fields away. And until this happens, until Hamas is not in power in Gaza anymore, until the hostages are home, then the state of war between Israel and Gaza will continue. And at the same time, Hezbollah in Lebanon, on October 8th, that's one day after the October 7th massacre, Hezbollah in Lebanon joined Hamas's war. They opened a second front against Israel. Hezbollah tied its fate to Hamas. And since Hamas is not agreeing to any kind of ceasefire, Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, appears to be offline, unreachable. The war goes on. Hezbollah continues to fire rockets today, yesterday, probably tomorrow, from Lebanon into Israel.
I agree, Daniel, that there are 7 fronts on which Israel is fighting, and it's an existential crisis that it's facing. The reason why I was pressing ahead on the same question about endless war is because a year into pounding into Hamas and Hezbollah infrastructure, they've been able to recoup and come out with fresh attacks. That's the reason I said, is a political solution the only possible way to end this? I'm completely out of time. Professor Andrew, 30 seconds. Where do you see this going? What do you think Benjamin Netanyahu's next step could be?
Almost all wars end in a negotiated settlement, but it depends on who is in the catbird seat, the driver's seat, as it were. If Israel continues to dismantle Iran's proxy infrastructure, it's going to have a better position than it would have, say, a year ago. So there will be some kind of negotiated settlement, maybe not around a table, but some kind of agreement, tacit maybe, and that will bring this to an end for a while.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for speaking to NDTV, joining in this very special broadcast. The fact is, Middle East is a crisis that has escalated. The reason for that is that what started with Hamas attacks quickly spread out to Hezbollah, Syria, Yemen, and several other fronts. For Israel, it is an existential crisis, but the painful truth about this is also the fact that there is a human cost of this war. Yes, there is no way to assess how many exact civilian casualties have happened both in Lebanon and in Gaza, because all the numbers mix up both the terrorist and civilian casualties. But the human cost of war and the sheer longevity for how long it's been going on probably now begets some sort of a solution, not in the military field, but across each other. Thank you so much for watching this very special broadcast.